Thanks for coming to the talk today. I'm sorry this won't have anything about pen testing, but it will have some pretty good stories about a very sequestered systems we mostly know little about, ICS SCADA, mainframes, and a little allegory about how bad things happen to good systems. So to get started, I'm Cheryl Biswas. I work with KPMG in Toronto, one of the big four. I'm a threat intel analyst, and I love what I do. I fell into this, and I haven't stopped learning, growing, and discovering. It ties in very nicely with my bizarre fascination around APTs, ICS data, mainframe systems, Stuxnet, of course, and Star Trek. I have done a variety of talks now at a variety of locations, and I'm very, very honored to be here in Quebec to do Hackfest. That means a lot to be here in Canada. I've got a blog, and I also am encrypted on the Twitters. Just a disclaimer, the views that I present here today are solely my own and not those of my employer. So to begin, I'm going to present to you what I consider to be head in the sand defense. So you say SCADA. Well, we say mainframe. And one of the points that I'm bringing up is too often we fail to learn from the lessons of the past. That's one of the cautionary notes in this talk. And I wanted to show you the parallels that I have observed between the sequestered and very critically important systems associated with ICS SCADA and how those parallels will impact the equally sequestered and critical systems that run on mainframes. Before I get started, does anybody here actually work with ICS SCADA systems? And does anybody here work with mainframes? Pretty select crew. In general, just show of hands, how familiar do you feel about ICS SCADA and what it runs as a group? Not that you use it, but you have a good sense of what it does? Okay. That's a good point. How about mainframes? They will never die. Yes! Yes! I should have brought chocolates. I would be giving them out like crazy for that. Thank you. Yes. So we have perceptions around these systems, and those perceptions are going to bite us in the ass, and that's why we have to have this kind of a talk, because we need to start moving past what we think we know into what the reality of the situation is. So SCADA ICS, the challenges continue to evolve as these systems continue to get plugged in to the network, to the Internet of shit, as we call it. And it's going downhill fast. What we've moved from is a position of relative security. These devices were designed to be segregated. They talked amongst themselves. That was great until somebody stopped that and started opening it up to a bigger network. Because you have to do business, because you have to go with the flow, because you have to reach your Facebook, because you need to plug in. These devices were never designed with that kind of security in mind. And we know what Band-Aid solutions are. I'm afraid you can't even really do a good Band-Aid solution as far as making ICS data devices more secure when you're opening them up to the Internet, because you're taking much older equipment, to my friend in the purple shirt, which is why they break, 30 and 40-year-old equipment, and you're running it to the point of failure. We'll talk more about that later. And you're bringing these devices and letting them join the highway to hell. Now, about a week or so ago, I'm sure this was heard everywhere. I hear this all the time. Mom, the Internet is broken. Yeah, and it really was. We've got acts of God, acts of nature, acts of man, and apparently acts of bots and webcams. So if the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, we're getting extremely good at it. And that's the problem here. So I'm going to invite you to grab your drinks and grab some popcorn, and I shall present to you a Stuxnet for mainframes. So in the beginning, there were mainframes, and it was good. And then came SCADA, and that was good too. Now, I don't think you know what this is, but it's the equivalent of what we use in terms of desktops, only this is called a PLC, a programmable logic controller. It's about $10,000 worth of very temperamental stuff. It's expensive. You handle it hopefully with care, but these are big, robust machinery that live in the places where ICS SCADA is doing what is essentially the dirty work. And it's running things. It's in gas and oil pipelines. It's in electrical grids. It's in nuclear plants. It's where we power our hospitals, do major traffic control, pipelines. It has to be robust because it needs to keep running and not really as hands-on and connecting with all of the things that we're used to. It really is a different world. And then came the internet, which changed everything. Now, not all of a sudden, and maybe that was the problem, because the problem happened when we weren't looking. So if evolutionary theory bears out, things aren't going to do well for SCADA. So we'll do a quick little refresh course on what essentially SCADA and ICS are. They're in these massive industrial facilities, helping us to run the things that we take for granted, that are part of our daily lives. This is what critical infrastructure is. Yes, I always like to think in terms of the Die Hard movies, probably Die Hard 4, where everything blows up and it's a national disaster. And you can't access your money, and you can't get gas into your car, and you can't turn on the lights, and you can't drink the water. But that really is a disaster. And there very much is a reality of that happening. Not necessarily due to Bruce Willis and terrorist threats, but due to equipment and equipment failure and connecting things that were never designed to be connected to a world full of vulnerabilities, exploits, and threats. Now, I have friends who work within SCADA ICS, and they like to describe the equipment in one word: weird. And it is. You really have to have a unique understanding of the people who are working with this and what their needs are and what this equipment is and how it's designed to do the task it was initially designed to do. Problem is, it's still over here, and we've moved here. So yeah, back to critical infrastructure. And it's all the stuff that runs our day-to-day lives. Think for a minute, what can you afford to live without? Transportation? Nuclear power plants? And yes, this stuff can be everywhere. You have no idea the extent to where and which it is. So this is a good representation of a layout in terms of SCADA architecture. It's a slightly different networking system than what we're used to, but it's built in terms of what it has to protect and how it really does need to connect in and amongst itself and only send the data out to where it needs to go. And that's the key point. Everything was working fairly well when this model was being observed, and you weren't bringing other devices in. It was tailor-made for these specific types of devices. And then these devices were built strong and well, and with the intent that they would be used, and I kid you not, for 30, 40 years, at which point they would die and be replaced. The concept of patching does not exist in the world of ICS SCADA. That's huge. From a security standpoint, we know how important that is, because how many things have come up just over the past year, year and a half? Think in terms of shell shock bash, for example, where we're still continuing to do things. Or Linux, where there have been massive flaws that were in residence for 10 years only to be discovered now, and they're applying patches. Well, we're applying patches to solve problems that are affecting great swaths of people that have been long-term. But you don't have that option in this kind of a system because these are very proprietary systems. They're far more temperamental. 2 words, they break. And when they break, the stuff connected to them does not work, and you have got a real major problem on your hands. Essentially, yeah, it does not play well with others. So the brains of this system are the RTUs, or the remote terminal units, the PLCs, the programmable logic controllers. They're not Dell desktops. They're not Lenovo laptops where we know what the crapware is and we can yell at Komodo and take it off. These are very different systems. Maybe even the keyboards that they're attached to are different. They work off of Ethernet serial cables. They have stuff from the manufacturer that is built in, embedded firmware, hard-coded passwords. The stuff that we decry is the very basis of their existence. And yes, these things are built to last and run to failure. Well, let's talk a bit now about mainframes. So when we think of mainframes, is this pretty much the view we've got in our head? Big boxes, blinky lights, right? Or maybe these. Well, the big box, the blinky light, the shiny stuff, that's more of an IDS. It's not the mainframe. And contrary to what a lot of people might think, mainframes are not obsolete. Thank you for saying they are not dead. Nor are they impenetrable fortresses. Yes, they absolutely were designed with security and stability in mind. They are fantastic workhorses. They have throughput. They have massive processing power. They have a non-existent downtime. We dream of that kind of efficiency, and that's what they're built for. And that's why they run the most important stuff people can think to put on them. Because if you want fast, beyond fast, powerful, and oh my God, reliable, you put your stuff on a mainframe. Banks, governments, global finance, that's where they live. Travel, reservations, coordinating myriads of data that have to be done in the millisecond. That's what these are for. The bottom line, essentially, is that these control the bottom line. You can just ask the guys at Swift about that. So yeah, Big Iron is not going anywhere. And it handles big data in a very big way. And we know that we are dealing with a big problem in terms of the amount of data that we have to process and safeguard in terms of the breaches that we've been watching. The escalation in magnitude in terms of both size and number. Nothing is impenetrable. So here's your takeaway if you need a screenshot on the key values of mainframes. This is what they really are. This is why they're still in existence. And yeah, they look a lot better. They've got a brand new box on them. And these things are built to last. They will last for years. And no, you do not play with them. Nobody touches the mainframe. I don't know if you've worked with people in mainframe shops, but there's a special group of people who have access to the mainframe. They talk amongst themselves. I've worked in a mainframe shop. I can say this. And that was a long time ago. And the guys I worked with were way older than me. And the reality of the industry is that the guys who are working on mainframes are still way older in many cases than most of the people in this room. And they really are losing a talent pool because we don't have people stepping into the role to learn these machines, the culture, the reality of working with them, how to work with them. And they're getting integrated now into SysOps and DevOps, into a hybrid world that they were never designed for but have to become part of. And the security for that is definitely not baked in. So we're going to play a quick little game. The remarkable parallels between SCADA and mainframe. Would you say the culture is the same? Hands up. Yes? No? What about the perceptions that people hold about both of these? Similar? That these are safe because they're segregated? Something not to be touched by the general public? That both systems are closed off? You check that box off. Both systems are built to last. And both systems, based on what I've told you, appear to have the same approach to securing them. And that is not a good thing. And no, the truth is neither system plays well with others. So, are we learning the lessons from what came before us to be able to apply them to what's here and now and where we're going in the future? The cautionary tale of what's happened within the realm of ICS data applies very much to what the future holds for mainframes. And we don't have to look too far to see how this is going to apply. Let's talk about BYOD and IoT. In where you work, are people having issues with regard to BYOD? Put up your hand and let me know if you think you are having issues around that. Do you think that there is an effective way to secure a workplace and deal with BYOD, or do you think we are looking at a growing problem? Basically, everything I've done as far as research is telling me the truth of that. And then we have, of course, the IoT. And we learned some pretty hard lessons about a week and a half ago with just how bad that's getting. Because everything that you can plug in, you do. Toasters, crock pot, yes. You can call your oven and set it. I really don't want to go there. And your fridge. And probably your washing machine. Does all of this stuff actually need to be connected? We need to ask that not just for the Internet of Things, but also for the industrial Internet of Things. We've got a security culture that embraces the concept of bringing your shit into work. So here are two buzzwords, innovation and disruption. Those are driving business. Those are being pushed down from the C-suite. Those are affecting how everybody has to do things because it's all about getting the product to market with the least amount of hassle, with the least delay, because you have to beat the competitor because you're profit driven. You're a business. You justify your existence in terms of what you are able to net. So it takes disruption. And sometimes that means things like shadow data and shadow IT, where you are harnessing things without the blessing of the people who actually monitor the network and know what's going on. So a lot of stuff is going on that you don't know about, which increases the risk of stuff that's being added into your network of things that puts into peril the segregated and specialized systems of ICS data and mainframes. So it comes down to the fact that we're still not getting the basics right. We know that. But that is our stumbling block. Passwords, encryption, access, patching. These four things alone are huge. I think they could effectively solve 80% of the problem and give us back the control we need, but that is in an ideal world. Now, when people developed ICS data and then when they developed mainframes, they didn't know what the future was going to hold. They built in the security that they needed at that time. There was no thought given to what it might connect to down the line. And with the new and wonderful world of the Internet of Things, security we know is an afterthought. Nobody's put it in, really. And nobody's told the buyers what they need to do to secure themselves. So you've got a whole bunch of new attack vectors that we're up against that we really haven't got controls in place yet to deal with. So we've got weak passwords, default passwords, passwords that are coming in through embedded devices, firmware that you can't flash. And even if you could, would you be able to get the average consumer or the average employee to do that? No, it's not a reality, but it's a huge risk. So one of the things that I found fascinating was on a recent podcast that I listened to with a guy named Stephen Ridley, because there's a new area of expertise coming up. It ties in directly with the Dyn DDoS attacks that we've experienced. We know that DDoS is now it's at a crest, and it's only going to get worse. People like Stephen who understand how the Internet of Things is working and evolving says as much. His company specializes in looking at how do we secure these devices? Where are the problems? And he said that 90% of the stuff that they are looking at either has embedded firmware or hard-coded passwords with backdoors. 90%. So it's not about stupid passwords and reusing passwords, which we know is a massive problem in and of itself. It's about something we can't even get in there and fix. And it's being sent out the door, sold into corporations and businesses, lock, stock, and baggage, and set up. How do we secure about that? What do we do with that? Then we've also got that compounded with things like unencrypted hard drives, which are, we know, to be root causes of multiple breaches. Well, this is going on in the industrial realm. And have we learned from the perils to ICS SCADA? Is there something here that we're going to be able to apply to better secure the world of mainframes and all of the other very critical data that resides there? Have you heard this one? Welcome to Head in the Sand Defense. If it's designed not to be connected, then it's not connected, right? It's impenetrable. It's safe because it's different. As much as I would like to say we are all special snowflakes, no. And I see SCADA is one snowflake that is going to melt, and so are mainframes if we keep taking this as a security approach. I thought this was fascinating and very telling. So Project Shine started 2013. Eric Byers and Bob Radvanovsky. They did this because they wanted to show how many devices are connecting to the internet, and who here has not played on Shodan to see what you can find. You can find amazing stuff on Shodan, and that's because none of that stuff should have been there. Exactly, mausoleums, giant dump trucks, boats. Oh my gosh, it's on there and it shouldn't be on there, and it's growing by the day. Well, they started this project in 2008, and they were getting between 2,000 to 8,000 devices that shouldn't be connected daily. They were at 1 million by 2013. Now, think about that. And then it's not that this is a new problem. We've got people who really understand this stuff who've been talking about it. For example, I don't know if you know him, James Arlen, Mercurial on Twitter. He has worked in the realm, and he gave a talk at Black Hat about what he perceived to be the growing dangers for ICS data, the problem with the attitude around securing stuff, connecting stuff. And he described it as the greatest threat being humans, because oops happens. Yeah, we know that, and we can't. As much as we want to, the one thing that we can't do is secure the human factor. That will always be the variable in our security equation. So if this is happening in the realm of ICS data, think bigger, because It's going to happen in the realm of mainframes. So what we have are default web interfaces with, everybody loves it, admin privilege, because there should be admin for all. And I have seen, and we know about stories where admin and all access pass is just the way things get done in certain businesses, because ignorance is bliss, and it's about keeping people happy, and it's about the least obtrusive way to get stuff done. But it doesn't solve the problem, it just creates the problem. So things like this are, we've got passwords that are being used, they're not being disabled, they're just left up and running. A case in point with the Swift bank heist, the guys who were sent there to set them up, they couldn't get access to the room where the servers were. And they were not inspired to go a step further and actually do the due diligence to do it right. So they set themselves up a Wi-Fi. And then they connected these systems. Now, this is a trusted messenger system that moves trillions of dollars in transactions a day. And when they were finished, they forgot to take down their Wi-Fi system. And it was discovered. Now, if you haven't heard about it, but I've given some talks, there was an attack on one of the banks that was connected into SWIFT, Bank of Bangladesh. And the attackers would have had $1 billion, except somebody made a spelling mistake, so they only had $100 million by the time they were finished helping themselves. Bad things happen to good sequestered systems. And it can happen to power grids, and it can happen to medical devices, it can happen to traffic lights, it can happen to air traffic control. I have a good friend, Chris Sistrunk, who's an expert in the field of ICS data security, and he's given several talks now on network systems monitoring and why you need to be actively looking for the threats that are in your network, because we know they definitely are there. If you're not watching, you're not seeing. And people have said to him repeatedly, well, if ICS systems are so vulnerable, why haven't we seen more attacks? And the bottom line is they're not monitoring. They're not actively looking. That's why you need to be watching, because your logs are going to tell you what you're not seeing. It's there. You've got to use it. How do you find evil if you're not looking for it? So there, at this point, is very little ICS targeted attack data. That doesn't mean, just because you can't see it, doesn't mean it isn't there. Just because you're not monitoring your network does not mean that an attacker is in there and lurking. And we've got a case in point that can prove that. The one being the attack on the Ukrainian power grid this past December. You've probably all heard about it, but it was significant, very significant. It was a major outage just before Christmas, in the right when it's cold in winter. Really, would you want your lights to go out? Would you not? Would you want to have your power up at Christmas? I mean, it was the target was perfectly timed to hit ordinary consumers. And the brilliance behind it was the attackers thought about this very carefully. They disabled the phone system so that they set up a denial of service on the phone system so that people calling in to complain that their power was out weren't getting through. And the guys running the power had no idea. They weren't getting the alerts. So we had a full-fledged attack going on, power shutting down in major regions, and the guys who are handling the system are sitting ducks for what's coming next and what was a brilliantly planned out series of attacks to bring them down. The attackers had been in the network doing their homework, gathering everything, all the information that they needed to know to use this. Think about when you were kids and you played a really good game of hide and seek or an ultimate game of tag, and you needed to know how to hide so that your friends would not find you. Exactly the same thing here. The attackers got into the regular network. They found out all the information they could about the company. And one of the things that they found was, ding, 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 VPN credentials. Because over on the other side, because there was a perceived air gap here, was the stuff that they really wanted to handle. That was the stuff they were going to hack. That was the stuff that controlled the critical infrastructure and systems for the power grid. But you couldn't get over here if you didn't have that access. But that access was in the credentials over on this side, which the attackers were able to hack, make off with, then access over here. Then they learned about these specialized systems and what it would take to bring them down in a series of well-planned steps to disable them, to shut down the systems. And this is where learnings from the past come in. Because if you know anything about how Stuxnet was engineered and the steps to that, how it would pivot and hide itself, how it was set to look for specific pieces of equipment, how it was designed to literally collapse and die if it didn't find what it was looking for, so as to be undetectable, to erase its footprint. It's very, very hard to detect something that erases its footprint. You have to really know that you are looking for something. And it's only going to erase its footprints if it's designed to go and do some pretty dirty work. Well, that's what the power grid thing was about. So the attackers got in and started setting stuff down. They told the systems to continue to tell the operators that everything was fine. Not until the lights went off in the consoles in front of them did the operators realize there was a problem. Phone calls weren't coming through. The stuff that they were actively monitoring was telling them bold-faced lies that things were okay. That's the lesson that we're taking out of this. This was huge when it broke, and a lot of care and investigation has gone into it to really mine the information and also to be careful about playing the attribution blame game, which we know is very tempting but also very risky. But there were lessons in here to us from what we needed to be learning from 2010 and Stuxnet. Those are the things we want to apply to these supposedly sequestered, secured, and very critical systems. Monitoring. If you aren't looking for the attacker in your network, you're not going to find him until he has done his business, because he's already found you. So some SCADA attack vectors. This one was a common or possibly uncommon one. The CIA, one of our favorite acronyms, created a Trojan, and then it caused a Siberian gas pipeline to explode. You have to be careful because we can't officially confirm this. It's being rated as likely. But the lesson in here has been passed along so that we can learn from it. The story goes that the United States had allowed the USSR to steal pipeline software from a Canadian company. And that's something that we have a lot of here. We're replete in natural resources, but there's a lot of reports about how lax Canadian information security still is, and there's been a big push to try and step that up and address it. Well, that attack was devastating to the USSR. They couldn't tell which systems were infected and which systems weren't. And Trojan malware is still one of the most it's one of the most powerful and popular attack vectors out there. But you get that in a SCADA system, it's harder to monitor it, much harder to patch and clean up systems and defend against it. We have a situation where, for example, Configure, it's a worm. We have lots of Configure still riddling ICS SCADA systems out there because it hasn't been detected, because it hasn't been monitored, because it hasn't been patched. Another attack vector, this is the Maroochy Shire sewage spill. So this is in Australia. disgruntled employees. We know that that happens across the board as well. In this case, he worked in a SCADA environment. He helped himself to some equipment, and he was able to damage the systems and unfortunately alter data around the sewage pumping stations. And I don't know about you, but in Walkerton, we had a bad case of an E. coli breakout. We know how deadly that kind of a situation is. And there's a lot more worry going on around the water and the water filtration systems down in the States, mostly because of aging infrastructure. But that again makes them far more at risk to people who want to target them or just to breakage. This is another popular example of the risks for SCADA because we know that industrial systems like this German steel mill rely on it to run. This was a social engineering case. So we had multiple attackers who harnessed social engineering to gain access. Has anybody here done pen testing, in which case have you done physical pen testing to try and gain access to buildings? Tailgating, coming in as a security guard and bringing in deliveries, but finding your ways into a place that is secured that you have no business being. This is one of the things you have to really be actively testing and protecting your place too, because once they access you from the outside, then they get into the inside. And if you're not doing all that you can to secure your networks, you've got the guys, you've got the wolves in the hen house there, and it's just going to escalate. So people who work with SCADA and ICS systems really truly believe that these are still air gapped and that you cannot jump an air gap. But the fact was proven through Stuxnet and has been proven for the years past in multiple examples that yes, indeed, you can jump an air gap. That is not going to secure your systems. There is a way, and it's as simple as somebody carrying an infected USB key and plugging it in. Everybody's watched Mr. Robot, right? I don't know anybody who's actually picked up a key from a parking lot, but I do know people who have helped themselves to USB keys. And I have checked USB keys that I've been given at trade shows and found them riddled with malware. And that's getting plugged into these devices. So we've got remote key logging so that credentials can be caught and transported back to command and control servers and out of your hands. I'd liken believing in air gaps kind of like believing Hillary about those emails. And definitely not safe for SCADA. So back to one of our biggest challenges. We can't secure the human factor. And social engineering is one of those attack vectors that we have to be aware of, but we can't guarantee that we're going to be able to do anything about. All right, so we've gone over the links and similarities between mainframe and SCADA security issues. It's a culture, and it's an awareness. And if anybody has had to come up against how do you teach employees to do things differently or better, you know that it really is a long-term process. It's not going to be this once a year, we all sit down in the boardroom and there's some coffee and there's some danishes and we're going to do this questionnaire sheet, or you're going to do this computer online training course, and at the end of the 20 minutes that you're required to, you get to send it in, it gets rated, you've done your duty, and you're off the hook for another year. This doesn't accomplish anything, but I do like the Danish. But seriously, if it has code, it can be attacked. And yes, Virginia, there really are exploits for mainframes. So it's air gapped until it isn't, right? It's safe and secured until it isn't. So we think, because we're being told this by the experts in the field, that mainframes are not vulnerable because there's a lack of data saying that these systems are vulnerable. Because IBM would really like you to believe that they are super secure. And Swift will have you believe that they are super secure because their uptime on them is like almost 100%. I don't know about you guys, but for me, uptime does not equal security. So the attack data and the vulnerabilities and the CVEs are not readily accessible in the mainframe world. IBM holds those cards very close to its chest. But again, just because you can't see that there is a problem does not mean that there isn't one. And that's something that we have to be aware of. We run on a lot of security assumptions. And we have a fortress mentality around mainframes that because they are sequestered and because we do things differently, they're secured against outside threats. But we've got guys already in there. Yes, I'm going to show you something fun. There are Metasploit modules. And if it's in Metasploit, it's real, right? Because it has to be in existence. But a friend of mine, Phil Young, specializes in securing mainframes. And he works in the financial industry. And he was very concerned about the lack of actual testing on these systems to see what their vulnerabilities were. Because he knew just from playing around, because that's what hackers do. Even if you wear suits and you work for one of the big financial corporations, you're still testing things, breaking things, and fixing things to find out how they work. And that is the heart of security, and that is what we need to be doing. And that's why guys like Phil are really valuable to us. He found 400 mainframes online without login screens, or with login screens. And these login screens were accessible. So these could be with Toyota to run all of their customer files and their banking information, could be with banks, could be with universities and sensitive student data, could be with hospitals. He also has a friend, and I know him well, both of them now from working with them. So Chad Young. So Chad is Big Endy and Smalls on Twitter, and Phil is Soldier of Fortune. Both of them have the same issues and concerns, and they say that this keeps them up at night because they realized they were getting into something that they weren't supposed to be able to, which meant that attackers definitely were able to, but there was nothing in place to secure these systems from these kinds of attacks because they were told outright, no, no, that's impossible. No, that cannot happen. No, we will not allow penetration testing the way you're talking about it because it's not necessary. But it is necessary because you still can get into these systems. And once you get into these systems, holy crap, the stuff you can help yourself to, yeah. So I will talk you through a little bit about their exploit research. I'm not technical, but it is very, very interesting. My friend Hayden Johnson and I did a talk earlier about this, and he walked through some of the hardcore technical research to show what was able to be done to a mainframe. So yes, how about Nmap? Well, initially, Nmap isn't available for mainframes because a banner can't be read. A simple FTP banner can't be read by a mainframe. That's what Chad set out to prove, to do differently, which is what we need to be doing in terms of security to make it safer. So the mainframe sends multiple requests to create the banner, and Nmap had to be customized to allow you to do this. So Chad created customized scripts. I've included links to both sites for Soldier of Fortune and Big Endy and Smalls at the end of this, and I highly encourage you to go visit their blogs because they've made their research available. They want to invite people into this field because the more people who are actively testing, using these exploits, and developing security awareness around this, the better. So yes, thanks to what he was able to develop, you can Nmap and scan a mainframe. How about some shellcode for mainframes? Well, mainframes work on a different language. It's not ASCII, it's EBCDIC. So you need to have a translator for EBCDIC to ASCII to do that conversion. So we've got Nmap, and we've got a language translator. Let's see what else we can do with the exploits that they developed. So you have a prologue that sets up a dynamic storage area, because you're going to create a stack, and it's just going to be able to go and create that space coming over from the mainstream, set it the stack, what you're used to working with, only in a mainframe environment. Only you're not supposed to be able to do this on a mainframe. And that's the risk. And that's what attackers are looking to be able to do. And that's what we need to be aware of and prepared to test mainframe systems for. But nobody gets to play on the mainframe, right? And one of the key points is when these systems go down, they go down hard and they don't necessarily come back up. So I can fully appreciate the reservations around that. And that's something that we are needing to have a dialogue about. So you've got an allocation of memory in the function prologue, the creation of the stack. Then you've got your stack pointer and your base pointer at the same address. Here's your stack, and the function can run in the space. Then once it's finished, that stack collapses, and it's over. So the allocation of memory in mainframes is different than what we're used to in other systems. And it's based on, instead of having a procedure, epilogue, and a prologue, it just has the dynamic storage area. So Chad looked at how to create that and bring it into what we're used to working with, because the mainframe does not use a dynamic stack. But you can find workarounds once you understand how the system is. But keeping the system segregated and closed does not prevent people from learning and then making workarounds the way that Chad and Phil have, so that they can test these systems and exploit them. There's also string exploitation. So I'm going to move a little faster, but these will be on the slides for later if you want to reference. But yes, you can do a buffer overflow on a mainframe. You can do an FTP exploit on a mainframe. And it would be a lot of fun to be able to actually go do this on something that you've been told you can't access. It's hard. They went through a lot of grief. They've detailed at great length on their website the code they've used, how they came to develop it, the hurdles they've run into. And there literally are a handful of people in the world who actually do this stuff. So here is the first Metasploit module that Chad created to be able to go after mainframes. Because you're not supposed to be able to do this. It's set up essentially like any Metasploit module is. The architecture is set to command. It executes a command. The platform is mainframe. And the target is automatic. Now, Chad set it up so that verbosity and FTP debugging were in place in case the exploit didn't work. It checks the banner, and if the banner is correct, then it logs in and it uploads the file. like an FTP upload. But again, you're not supposed to be able to do an FTP upload on a mainframe. So JCL is job control language in mainframe speak. There you go. Now a reverse shell can also be used. And it translates the acidic to the ASCII code. So I'm going to show you a very cool demo that Chad sent me. It's not live because bad things happen to live demos, but this is something that he created to prove a buffer overflow exploit and other ways to hack a mainframe. This is harnessing mainframe ZOS. This is version 2.1, and it's running on an older version of JBoss. JBoss is prevalent in lots and lots of middleware. It's on everything. And there are many older versions of JBoss out there that are running unpatched and very exploitable. So it's often packaged with third-party products as a container for their management interfaces. For example, Java applications that can manage whatever the Z product is. So you have JBoss, and it installs, the installs and configurations are afterthoughts. We know this from security. Security is often an afterthought. So these are sent out pretty much exploitable from the package. So this is an out-of-the-box JBoss install that could have come from a third-party vendor. You bought it, you loaded it, you trusted it. And it's vulnerable to something called the jexboss.py exploit kit. You know, there's plenty of exploit kits. This is the one that puts this one at risk. It's got a command shell that works perfectly. So Java does the acidic to ASCII translation. And boom, and you get a nice, clean USS on a ZOS shell. And that's not supposed to happen. So if the JBoss instance is relevant, that's considered that it could be running as a privileged ID, because in many cases it is. Well, guess what? You get to inherit all of those privileges along with them. Boom. Game on. And that brings us to Stuxnet. Because it just takes a little thing, doesn't it? And how easily transmittable that virus was. And the simplicity, but the complexity of the attack. Bypass the air gap, you have advanced persistent threats. They're living within the network for a long time, gathering all of the information, communicating actively back and forth between command and control servers, erasing its tracks. Well, where does that put us after the power grid attack? Well, I would like to say a little crystal ball gazing. And we've got a lot of political volatility out there with Russia and China. What do you think could be a worst case analysis? Well, certainly if we think back to 2008 and what happens to the global financial system when you try and mess around with that, how impactful it is, that's what is running on mainframe. All that money, all those finances. And if you wanted to get your point across or just mess around, attacking the global financial system is a very effective way to do it. We talked about SWIFT earlier. And if we're moving into a realm of cyber warfare, nation states hiring massive advanced third parties like Carbonac or Lazarus Group to do their dirty work for them, and being able to access things like ICS SCADA and mainframes, we're not prepared for what they're able to bring in terms of an attack. I'm just going to close off with the ransomware attacks that we saw this past winter on the hospitals. They were unprecedented. They were unlike any attack, let alone ransomware attack, that we'd ever seen. Nobody expected somebody was going to go after the most vulnerable, that they were going to bring down a hospital and they were going to use ransomware, which isn't just malware, it's destructive. It's mean with a capital M, and it is really scary stuff because you can't fix what it breaks. I worked with guys who were actively charting the course of this, and they were scared by what they knew was coming. And it wasn't just because somebody clicked on an email. This stuff was living in the JBoss software, the middleware. It got in through the servers, and that was a whole new level of exploit, a whole new vulnerability that nobody saw. So my friends at Talos worked together and put a hell of a kick-ass guide about the history of ransomware and where they saw it going, and talking about ransomware that's metamorphosizing, evolving, able to pivot, moving laterally, wiping its traces clean, communicating back and forth, actively searching out what it should be on. This is scary, and this is what I see going on mainframes. And yeah, the guys who really know mainframes agree completely with me on this, and this is what they're going to be talking about very, very soon. And that, my friends, would be my Stuxnet for mainframes. You go after the keys to the kingdom to own it, and you bring it down when you do. And it's all based on the fact that we still don't learn from the lessons of the past, that we need to be applying the things from other segregated systems like ICS SCADA from what they had in terms of Stuxnet to what we know about the Gibson. So yeah, you can hack the Gibson. And yes, you can jump an air gap. And yes, if it's happened once, it can happen again. So we've got a whole new realm of industrial internet of shit just waiting to happen. And DDoS is only beginning to crest. But I'm going to end on a positive note and say it doesn't have to be that way, because we could learn now from the dire lessons of the past, and we know what's coming, and we can work more actively towards preventing it now that we know what we didn't know. Because it's hard to secure what you don't see and what you don't know. Question is, will we do it? Thank you. Thank you very, very much.